I'm Nancy Cook. I'm the director of the Center for Human Artificial Intelligence and Robot Teaming. And welcome to our speaker series. And we are really pleased to have with us today Dr. Danielle McNamara. She's a professor of psychology, and she has published extensively on topics related to educational technologies, game-based learning, reading comprehension, writing, text and learning analytics, and natural language processing. She has served as an associate editor for 5 academic journals and currently serves as a founding editor of APA's Technology, Mind, and Behavior journal, which she's going to talk to us about today. So welcome, Danielle, and I'm so pleased to have you here, and I'm going to mute because I have so much background noise.
That's okay. That is the place we're in now, in Zoom land at home, where we have a lot of background noise. So I think we're pretty much used to it by now. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen and get started. Let me get that going. And I think there she goes, right? Do you see the screen?
Yes, yes, we do.
Great, great. All right, so I'm Danielle McNamara, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my research, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about technology, mind, and behavior. And in this talk, because a large number of the people in the group, the students in the group, are involved in robotics research, I decided to center on some papers that have been recently published in Technology, Mind, and Behavior, hence the title. So here's a sneak peek of what I'm going to be talking about. First, because a large number of the audience are students, I'm going to talk a little bit about where I'm coming from and my journey. I'll talk about research from the lab and stop for questions and answers along the way before I talk about technology, mind, and behavior. So I have lived in many places along the way in my career, from Kansas, where I'm from, to back to France, back to Kansas, and then on to Arizona, where I am now. And along the way, I haven't had a straightforward career. I started off in psychology, and then I switched to linguistics, and then I taught English as a second language, and then I moved on to my academic career. I've studied linguistics, memory, skill acquisition, comprehension. I went from there to study strategy interventions and building tutoring technologies, and then integrating natural language processing within those, which kind of completed a loop back to my roots in linguistics. So this is, I'm going to just give you a brief overview of our the research in our lab and what we're doing. So one part of what we're doing, or foundational part, has to do with language and literacy. So we focus largely on comprehension and writing. So how do people comprehend texts? And how do they write high quality essays? And what are the individual differences in comprehension and writing? And then along the way, I've focused on developing tutoring technologies. So I study the basic processes in reading and writing, but I also develop tutoring technologies based on my understanding of those processes. So for example, we've built iStart, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that a little more. And that is a tutoring technology to provide strategy, instruction, and comprehension. and to help less skilled readers to learn how to better understand challenging texts. We're also developing iStart Early right now. That is a version of iStart that is focused on 3rd and 4th graders. And then we're also developing Writing Pal. We've been developing Writing Pal for a while. And that's a tutoring system that provides students with strategies on how to write essays. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. All of these are game-based. So along the way, we've learned that in order to provide instruction to students, it has to be engaging. And so we've incorporated short dynamic games within these tutoring systems. They're also interactive. That is, as students are comprehending the text, they're actually creating or constructing responses. They're writing explanations or they're writing essays, and using natural language processing, we provide feedback to the students that allows them to, or helps them to improve in their reading and writing. It's also related to my focus on providing researchers and creating tools on natural language processing. So as we've been developing these tools, we've also in order to provide automated feedback, we've also been developing tools that that provide natural language processing to researchers and teachers. So the first tool we developed was a tool that was focused on assessing text difficulty, Cometrics. And Cometrics, I built that because early on in my career, I was focused on text cohesion because that's a really foundational aspect of language and text. But there was no way of assessing it. So I built Cometrics, my team built Cometrics, in order to provide researchers with a tool that assesses various aspects related to text and text difficulty. Along the way, we've also built tools related to other aspects of language. Here are 2 examples. One is Seance, and that assesses multiple aspects of emotion in language. And then Taco, which is a tool that was built to assess literally thousands of indices related to cohesion. And then the writing assessment tool is something we're currently building. The writing assessment tool is a tool that is like Cometrics, but it focuses on writing quality. So there are different aspects of language that are related to text difficulty than to writing qualities. The writing assessment tool is going to be built for teachers, students, and researchers. So 3 user points for those tools. So combining this natural language processing that we're using, as well as these tutoring tools, we also are currently on a grant to develop game-based literacy assessment. Essentially, what we're trying to do is to develop a stealth assessment that's integrated within these tools, but also separate from those tools, so that teachers and researchers can use these tools, which are going to be more engaging, to assess the literacy of their students. We're also involved in research on social media and misinformation, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. One of the reasons we got into this is because it matters. The other reason is because we've started looking at multi-document comprehension in the context of iStart. So not only how someone understands one text, but then how do they build a representation across multiple texts? That's important for learning, for classroom learning, but it's also important in social media, where while you're in a social media context, you're actually reading different sources of information from the internet, and then you build a mental representation. But along the way, you're going to encounter misinformation or disinformation, one of the 2. And so we've been looking at Twitter corpora and news articles, and also one of the goals is to build tools that will help students to be more impervious to misconceptions. So just to give you a little bit more detail about some of the tools that we've been building, here's iStart. So as I said, that's interactive strategy training for active reading and thinking. And one of the initial aspects of it was that it provides instruction and self-explanation. So it combines self-explanation strategy instruction with instruction to use comprehension strategies. So self-explanation is simply the process of explaining text to yourself. And if you're a student and you're reading a challenging text like your textbook or maybe an article that your teacher has told you to read, then you are likely to encounter sentences and sections of text that you don't understand. What iStart teaches you to do is simply to explain it to yourself using various strategies like using bridging inferences and elaborative inferences. Then iStart, while it's teaching you how to do this, giving you instruction and practice, it provides automated feedback on the quality of your explanation. It's also game-based, so the game-based aspects of it we found also improve comprehension and your ability to understand challenging text, but it's also more fun and more engaging. So as I said, it increases self-explanation and comprehension strategies. Students also, when they finish reading using iStart, they have more positive attitudes toward reading. The games work by increasing engagement. And one of the things that's very important about a tool like this is that it helps the less skilled readers, the low knowledge readers, not those who are already performing well, although it does help them too. Students indicate that they enjoy iStart. So the Writing Pal is another tool. Like iStart, it provides strategy instruction. And it provides strategy instruction in writing, introduction, body, and conclusion. So not that you need to do it, but strategies on how to do it well. And it gives you 9 instruction strategy modules, and those consist of lesson videos and educational games. One aspect of Writing Pal that's very important is that the students write essays as they go along in the tutoring system. And this provides automated writing evaluation. One large part of our research has been in creating those algorithms, and then revising them along the way. So we're constantly creating newer and better algorithms using the new and better AI that is coming up in the field. So how do we do this? One of the ways we do this is that we have people score the essays. For example, here is a scoring rubric that one of our evaluators may have used. And so then we create statistical scoring models that predict either the overall score or aspects of the score. And then we introduce those aspects within a feedback model. So for example, just to give you an idea of what that might look like, if you're writing an essay, then our system produces aspects, scores, overall scores, as well as rubric scores. So it might say, because you have already a fairly good introduction, it might tell you that your next step is to start working on conclusion building. And then it also gives you, you can also access your previous versions as well as the previous feedback. And one of the aspects of the automated feedback is that it doesn't say you are a bad writer or you need to do this, or that it basically gives them the problem, the identification of the problem, and then how to resolve the problem. So Writing Pal has many benefits for students. It has increased performance on timed essays. It increases their knowledge of writing strategies, more positive attitudes toward the writing process. Essentially, if writers know that they are not going to write well, they don't enjoy the process. But as they learn how to engage in the basic strategies in order to write better essays, they enjoy it more. The games also have been shown to increase engagement, and the students have fairly positive attitudes toward the writing pal. Just to move on, just a little bit about some of our research on misinformation and misconceptions. And I'm covering this because I noticed that some of the students in CHART and the researchers in CHART were doing research on misinformation and misconceptions. We started this research just recently. And our approach to this is twofold. One aspect of it is on the NLP side. So we're collecting corpora. These are Twitter corpora as well as news articles. And also another aspect of it is to build, to better understand the process of misconceptions, building misconceptions and overcoming misconceptions. So here is just a sneak peek at work that we're developing right now. We've developed multiple sets of corpora from tweets. One is from just regular tweets. Another had to do with coronavirus, and another had to do with debates. And so our objective is going to be to compare those Twitter corpora and to examine the extent to which they are different from regular texts as well as different from each other. One of the things that we found is that they are remarkably similar to published texts. So one approach to doing this work is to conduct a principal component analysis. Essentially what you're doing is you are examining what amount of variance is accounted for within this corpus using the features of the language. And so we take these corpora and then we run the NLP and we conduct a principal component analysis that tells us what are the aspects of those, that set of texts. And so for this text set, we found that 47% of the variance among the tweets was accounted for by 10 components that are composed only of the linguistics and the semantics. And this is important because we're not even accounting for some of the particular aspects that would be germane to tweets, which would account for a lot more variance. And so what we see is that, for example, cohesion and word complexity and syntactic complexity, as well as the concreteness of the ideas, account for a large amount of variance. And this is the same for published texts. That is, the cohesion of the text and their complexity is an important part of large corpora of texts that you would read in a textbook. Also important in these texts are aspects about the actions and events. So these are more like narrative texts where in a tweet, individuals are stressing what's happening, what are the actions or what are the events. So what we're going to do, we're just at the beginning of this research, what we're going to do is examine profiles across different types of corpora, but we haven't actually started that work yet. Another aspect of our work is studying the predominance of certain types of misconceptions. So we've started some preliminary work in building a corpus of misconceptions, so to speak. And then also on, we'll go from there on how different interventions that might be effective on overcoming them. One study that's been recently done by one of the postdocs in the group, Reese Butterfuss, is a study to look at the effects of filter bubbles. Now, we can't actually study filter bubbles very easily within an experimental study. And so what he did is gave students first they looked at a set of tweets that showed either one side or another side of a text that they were going to read. Then afterwards, he looked at their comprehension. And this is fresh off, just fresh out. And so what he did is he's been looking at the comprehension of the text and the amount recalled. And the one conclusion from that is that if a reader is with outside of the filter bubble, in essence, outside of what they believe in, then they might recall less of what they read within a text. Whereas if they actually agree with it and they've seen tweets about it, then they may recall more. So that too is something that we'll be looking more at in the future. So just to give you an idea of who's in the lab, we have many postdocs and research scholars, and who are multidisciplinary. So they cover the realm of human factors and educational technologies and teachers' use of technologies, as well as experimental work, cognitive science, and educational psychology. And then we have a group of graduate students and research assistants who conduct research on these topics. We also work with many collaborators across the states and the world, in Romania and New York and Georgia and New Hampshire and Minnesota and here. So I listed Rod Roscoe, who is responsible and contributed to a large amount of the work that I just presented. So I'm going to stop here. I've been chatting for a little while, so I'm going to stop here and see if anyone has questions, and we'll just stop for like 10 minutes or so before we move on to the next section, where I'm going to talk about the next thing I'm going to talk about is the journal.
A quick question for me that I've been using Grammarly. Your work is very interesting about the writing pal and the writing assessment. So is that commercially available, or do you know the difference with other commercially available products like a Grammarly?
So do you mean, is the writing pal commercially available?
Mm-hmm.
No, because it's free.
Okay.
So it is available. I think that's the point. So all you need to do to access the Writing Pal and writing assessment is to enroll on adaptiveliteracy.com. And the Writing Pal can be accessed through that link. You register and then you can access it. And then through that, you can use it to assess essays, and you can assign students to write essays. In terms of like automated feedback that you would get from just by going on and writing an essay, that's the writing assessment tool, and it will be available once we're finished programming it. I might add that we've done a lot of work showing that assessing grammar does not improve writing. It improves superficial aspects of writing, and writing practice improves writing. But our research shows that in order to fundamentally improve on writing, students need to be given feedback on strategies that go at deeper aspects of writing. And adding, for example, evidence, how to build a convincing introduction, how to build a convincing conclusion to your paper, and so on.
Are these elements in the a writing pal built in?
Yes, that's what's in the writing pal. It does give automated grammar and spelling feedback as you're writing. But the main focus is on deeper aspects of writing quality.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions?
You know, since you're having a pause anyhow, I guess I'll ask one for the students that are here. I mean, did you, if people are interested in doing the kinds of things you are, like as a career, is there any advice, or just you have to learn everything like you do?
Well, I mean, one of the things, I call myself an interdisciplinary behavioral psychologist, in the sense that we're scientists, in the sense that I do mix multiple disciplines within my work. And so, I mean, I did get multiple different kinds of degrees and went on different pathways. I think what I'd say to a student is that it's okay to change pathways along the way. And you may be very likely to come back to something that you were passionate about to begin with, but didn't quite have the skill set to. So I would say to be patient and to work on things that you're passionate about. It is iterative, but to the, you know, as I was moving along, you know, I was probably faced with similar things. We just had less to learn, so to speak. There was less research to learn about. But on the other hand, our understanding of many of the phenomenon and the tools that we have are so much more powerful. Just to give an example, the first latent semantic analysis is a tool that we use to construct semantic relations in text. And it was one of the only things available back in the 90s. And so the first large corpus that I built, the corpus itself took 1.5 years to build. And by the time we built it, the time to build a corpus had reduced to a month. And now the time to build a corpus is a couple of hours. And of course, latent semantic analysis is outdated, and you can simply access these tools. You don't have to build them yourself. So while it seems overwhelming, also the tools that we have at our fingertips are so much more extensive and faster and more effective, more accurate, that while the starting point may seem a little bit frustrating, the acceleration toward goals is really much more rapid.
So as far as like graduate school or something like that, do you recommend that people like go to get a degree of sorts after they, you know, like a graduate degree, or that they get more experience working in the field, doing educational things? Or
I really think that depends on the person. I mean, that would be hypocritical for me to tell people that they had to go from undergraduate to graduate school, because I took a break, taught English, made babies, and then came back. And that real world experience was extremely critical for me, particularly since I graduated from college when I was 20. So I was from Kansas and had, other than running off to Colorado and various places, and France at various times, I didn't have a good real world understanding. So living in the real world, one of the things that gave me was a vital appreciation for academics. Like, I never, ever wish I were out in the real world again.
That's a great answer too, because I mean, you're also saying that you know, that you can succeed still no matter where you are if you just
Absolutely
refocus yourself. So even if somebody decides that they realize, you know, I realize I had this passion, now you can go back and do that.
Hey guys, just wanted to out loud make sure everyone.
Oopsie. Yeah, no, honestly, you know, I came back under circumstances that I'm not going to tell the story now, but hard to overcome circumstances. And so I would always advise someone that if you figure out that your passion is somewhere else, then don't hesitate to go back to school or redirect your energies.
Well, and you're also saying don't stop like having a family and enjoying life and doing
No, I'm also saying that. Yeah,
That's a great message.
I always, when talking with females, I always say, there's no good time to have a baby. There's always a good time to have a baby. So I actually think the best time to have a baby is when you're in graduate school. Because after that, things get a little muddled. But family is very important to me. So I would be hypocritical to give alternative advice to men and women about family and the importance of family.
Thank you.
I just want to pipe in on that too. I think you're exactly right. And I think too often students think that you have to have a specific goal in mind and specific career objectives. And if you don't, you'll just flail around. But I think that's completely untrue.
Yeah. It really is. And my, my standard answer to where do you see yourself in 5 years is, if I knew where I was going to be in 5 years, that would be boring.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we're good.
Okay. And then for those who are too shy, don't hesitate to type your questions into the chat, and then we'll cover them at the end if we have time. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to talk about the journal that we started last year called Technology, Mind, and Behavior. It emerged out of a society called Technology, Mind, and Society that recognized that there was a serious gap in the literature and the outlet for literature related to the relations between technology, mind, and behavior. And so that is research, empirical research on how technology impacts the mind and behavior and society, as well as how we interact with technology and how we can improve technology. And it's an important aspect of technology, mind, and behavior that it's an APA interactive open access platform. So it's APA, American Psychological Association. So that's a big organization with lots of journals. And it's also open because that means that the readers have open access to it. It's a free journal. And it's interactive because you can comment, put your own comments, and the figures and videos are interactive within the journal. So it's a really cutting edge journal in particular for APA. We also encourage but do not require open access in the sense of open science, in the sense of having access to data, but most of the authors are providing access to the data. And I encourage you to go to tmb.pubpub.org. It's PubPub because PubPub is the organization at MIT that is providing the interactive aspects to the journal. So if you go on the site, this is what you'll see. You'll be able to access the latest journal and also a link for authors and reviewers. And what you'll see is a description of the journal that I just gave to you, as well as news and calls and webinars. And then below there, you'll see the very latest papers that are on the journal. And so if you click on issues, you'll see that there's issue 1 and issue 2 for year 1. So we started publishing papers in 2020. It first opened in April. So that was a tough time for everyone, as APA and myself and everyone around me. And but since then, we've been publishing lots of very interesting articles, and I'm going to give you a sneak peek at a few of them. So if you look at the issues and the list of the full list of papers, you'll see that it's a wide range of research on a really wide range of topics and domains that are related to technology. So I really encourage you to read these papers. They're excellent papers. They're illuminating. They're related to a wide variety of issues. And I would say that to both the faculty and the students, that my sincere sense is that in order for us to better understand technology, mind, and behavior, we're going to have to understand it from different perspectives and different domains, and read articles from other individuals from different domains. So this is these are the complete issues from year 1. A lot of these just came out. And then I'm also going to give you a brief overview over a few papers that aren't online yet that are in production. So I'm going to talk about these articles, 5 from robotics, and then one article about misinformation, and then my last paper about Zoom fatigue. And this is the list of papers. I'm not going to read it. It's just a list of the papers that I'm going to talk about and the authors for robotics. And again, I'm focusing on robotics, not because they are the best articles of the journal, even though they are great articles, but because this audience is largely focused on robotics. So the first paper that, need to move something. Sorry, I'm gonna try to change something if I can. I cannot. Okay. All right. So the first paper is on evaluating mediated levels of presence. So this paper is a really good example of how TMB is open to qualitative research. It's really an excellent qualitative research study. The topic is about children who are homebound due to illness, and yet they have to go to school somehow. A typical child who's homebound will only have their parents who are present and the caretaker or the person taking care of them. What the mediated approach is looking at is the presence of robots within the classroom. So instead of the student being in the classroom, and it's not possible, there is a robot that attends class for them. And the purpose of this study was to investigate the social presence of homebound children who are using the telepresence robots in traditional schools. What they did is they did in-class observations and focus group interviews and semi-structured interviews with a few of the children. And their conclusions are collating across their their analyses of these various sources of information that showed that there were 3 different levels of robot mediated presence. One aspect of it was that the students were simply co-present. They were not interacting very much. They were there, and the other students would talk to the computer, but the further aspects were that they were simply cooperating. So it was children who display cooperating behaviors, occasionally moved their robots in the classroom when they were asked, and knew some personal details about the classrooms and shared their personal details. But what they weren't doing is collaborating a lot. So the children who were using the robots, who were collaborating, were independently moving their robots, even when they weren't told. And then, and that was comparable to the amount of their peers. Future research will look at the impact of these types of behavior, because now they've provided a rubric for it, on instruction as well as learning in the classroom. So the second paper I wanted to tell you about very briefly is by Reeves et al. And they looked at how robots are different and similar. So in their first study, what they did is they characterized a large corpus of robots based on social interaction attributes. And then in study 2, they looked at whether the extent to which robots were differentiated based on warmth and competence, and which ones, which aspects. So for the first study, they reviewed 1,471 articles, and they determined 21 attributes of the robots based on a categorical PCA. Remember that I mentioned using a PCA for natural language processing earlier. It's the same kind of approach. And they found that there were 2 factors. One is the robots are categorized based, or the variance between the robots can be characterized in terms of machine-like characteristics. And the other is in terms of human-like characteristics, like their face, the vision, and the speech. They asked 2 questions in study 2 using MTurkers. And they were looking at, they were asking them to evaluate the warmth and competence of social robots. In essence, what you're going to see is a strong theme in the research about the extent to which robots and humans are perceived as different or the same. And so one question is whether or not people use warmth and competence to differentiate social robots. And they found that there were 2 factors that accounted for 31% and 30% of the variance, respectively. They also asked which attributes predicted warmth and competence. So a robot was perceived as having higher warmth if its mechanics were invisible, so it doesn't look like a robot, it could see, and it looked more childlike. And I think that you have all experienced that. The more childlike people even are perceived as more warm, and more childlike robots are perceived as having more warmth. And a robot was perceived as more competent if it could move more and if it did not have fur skin. And so just like humans, if they have a lot of fur, they're not as perceived as being very competent people. Not that I know very many people with fur, but if they did have fur, I am almost certain they would be perceived. I knew you'd get that, Mike. Okay, so the third study that I wanted to tell you about, is a study on social psychological theories of intergroup behavior. Smith et al. Conducted a review of their articles. Some of the articles are published But TMB also gave them an outlet for unpublished studies. One of the reasons they were unpublished is because they were finding null results. And I want to add in here that TMB also publishes non-replications as well as studies with null results, because that is considered important to open science and continuing our scientific understanding of phenomena. And so what they've been focused on in their research is looking at dislike and discomfort with robots, and trying to find ways for people to be more willing to be assisted by robots. So they've conducted multiple studies to examine reactions to multiple robots and group level robot characteristics that can influence people's responses. They've also done studies to test interventions to increase comfort with robots based on interventions that have worked with humans. So they made conclusions from 10 previously published studies and 12 unpublished studies. In essence, they found that participants were more likely to interact with a group of robots than single robots. So when approached, when there were robots around, and here's a picture of the trash box robots, some children with the trash box robots. And people were more likely to interact when there were more than one robot than a single robot. And when multiple robots were present, they found that the robots, when the robots were social toward each other, then the participants also viewed the robots as more anthropomorphic and viewed people as having higher rapport with the robots. In essence, this also translates to when we are more social with each other, then we view people as having a higher rapport. The same thing happened with the robots. When the robots were nicer to each other, then they had a better view of the robots. I'll throw in here that this research has been done in multiple countries as well. And they've also looked at interventions that have known to reduce prejudice against human outcomes. And that's where they have mixed effectiveness with regard to robots, where they really don't have strong conclusions that the same interventions known to work for humans works with robots. And so in this study conducted by Johansson et al., they're examining the effect of robot humor on user perceptions and laughing behaviors, in particular in a healthcare scenario. So going back to the first study where we were looking at a robot in school, and then also how do people perceive robots in comparison to people. This study is looking at whether the kinds of things that humans do have, what kind of effects that has on perceptions of humans. So in this study, they hypothesized that robot humor by a healthcare robot would increase participant ratings of a robot's likability, intelligence, animacy, safety, empathy, and anthropomorphism. And so they had an experimental methodology where they varied their humor group and the non-humor group. And they included 91 participants. This is an example of their robot. And what they found, I'll just like glide over these graphs, which all have a high green bar and a low blue bar, which means that humor increased empathy, animacy, likability, safety, and sociability. And when participants encountered the humorous robot, they also laughed. So that's more of an examination that their manipulation was working. And this is an examination on their perceptions. And there was no significant difference between the two groups in perceptions of anthropomorphism or intelligence. The next one was by Jamie Banks, and of her study is of the like mind, mostly similar mentalizing of robots and humans. And this study, like some of the others that you've seen, is showing that how we are perceiving or mentalizing the mind of a robot is a little bit similar to how we mentalize or view the mind of humans. And so we can view all of these studies as preliminary and something that needs to be followed up. But in this study, they asked, do humans exhibit implicit mentalizing for social robots as they do for humans? And the answer is yes, mostly. And second question was, are the relationships between implicit and explicit indicators of mentalizing, that is the things that they are doing explicitly and those that they're doing implicitly, are they different? Are there relationships between the two? And the answer is not much. So there were not relationships found. And then how are the implicit and explicit mentalizing associated with trust in a social robot? And for that, they found that and for the study, they had two methods, an online survey as well as in-person live interactions. They found that the detection of non-literal language use was more likely for humans, but that is the kinds of things that we truly associate with being human, like lying and sarcasm. So not, being nice on the sly, and the intentionality of actions was more likely for humans. What they also found is that there were not very many other differences. The next to the last study that I wanted to tell you about changes gears and talks about misinformation. And what they did is they are looking at the role of emotions in identity protection cognition. And this is the sense that when group membership is threatened, that defense mechanisms lead to over-reliance on opinion congruent information in rejection of opinion incongruent information. So when we agree and when, in essence, we are threatened in this theoretical alignment theory, in this theory, they are talking about group memberships. And so political identity, then you will more likely to rely on the opinions that you agree with than the opinions you don't agree with. So participants were asked to draw inferences from politicized stimuli, and this was in the form of text, so small passages that they read, and then they gave agreement or to statements. So they had to choose a statement that they agreed with. They also studied emotion as well as identity protection. What they found was that political identity was not related to task performance and enthusiasm. So in fact, they did not find the results that they had predicted based on the theory of that they had thought of in the beginning. And this is a good example of, in essence, being honest about your predictions and the results. The political identity was only associated with anxiety and anger reactions to the passages, and the mediating role only applied to anxiety. So you see that only this link was related to task performance. Enthusiasm, it was directly related, and but it didn't mediate it. And also political identity was related to anger and anxiety. This is only one of the conditions. I didn't think I'd have time to present all 6 of these graphs. Overall, they found that emotions predicted performance more consistently than did political identity in their decision and their choice between the statements. Now, finally, what I want to tell you is going to come out in the next week or so is a paper that's based on Jeremy Balanson's talk that he gave at Technology, Mind, and Society. And he gave a wonderful talk, and if you can access it on the Technology, Mind, and Society website, I encourage you to do so. But in any case, it'll be available through Technology, Mind, and Behavior when it's when it's published in next month or so. And what he's talking about is the thing that you are all experiencing right now, literally right now, Zoom fatigue. So I've been talking for an hour, and you've probably been experiencing for the last year the talking with people online and via the squares on the screen. And this, the theoretical notion or question is, does Zoom fatigue exist? And then if so, what are the causes of it? And this is an Embodited theoretical article. And so one aspect of what he's talking about in this paper has to do with 4 arguments outlining the various aspects of the Zoom interface that may be leading to psychological consequences. He uses the term Zoom fatigue, not because Zoom is at fault. We can use other various interfaces in order to link to others and to conferences and to our projects. However, Zoom just happens to be a term that people are using and one of the most common interfaces that people are using. One aspect, if it has to do with the psychological aspect of excessive amounts of close-up in eye gaze. So when you're in a room, and if I were speaking in a room and I were talking to you as a large group, then I would see people look at each other. I would see a few people looking at me. People would be looking straight ahead. If I were teaching in a classroom, half of you would be asleep. And so the eye gaze is quite different. But when you're in a Zoom environment, everyone's looking at you. So you have direct eye gaze. For example, if you were in a room with if you were in a room with 9 people and you're the 9th person, all 8 other people would be looking at you for the duration of the meeting. And being stared at while you're speaking causes physiological arousal and fatigue. Other aspects of it that he talks about in this article has to do with cognitive load and the difficulty in sending cues or centering yourself in the camera's field of view. What they're finding is people nod in an exaggerated way, and they do things to signal agreement, and they look directly in the camera. And this augmented gaze can make people feel less in tune with the speakers. Another aspect that I am very conscious of is the increased self-evaluation from staring at the video of oneself. Because I don't actually know how to get rid of my picture in Zoom, and that's just me not being smart, I tend to use a different venue that doesn't show me. Because I'm very conscious of not trying to change my behaviors based on seeing myself in the video and the fatigue that one encounters as a function of doing that. You might, you might think of this as, what if in your daily life you were carrying a mirror around with you all the time? it changes the way you feel, it changes the way you react, and it can cause negative affect. Also, another aspect of it is reduced mobility. So when we're in a meeting, a normal meeting, we get up, we walk around, we're standing. He hypothesizes that potentially people can come up with more creative ideas when they're standing and walking around than sitting. And you may have experienced that yourself. So if we're in this sitting position and interacting like this, one question is, are we going to be less creative than we might have been if we were walking on the beach? Another aspect has to do with embodiment, and that's very important. So movements and gestures are part of the learning process, and there's a lot of research on that. And so one question is the extent to which movements and embodiment is reduced within this environment. So that's it. Please don't ask me any questions about those papers because no, I'm just kidding. But I, want to refer you and encourage you to go read those papers or contact the authors directly, because I'm sure I didn't give as good a representation as they would have given themselves. But hopefully it gives you an idea of the kinds of things that you will read on technology, mind, and behavior related to your area of research, which again, I assumed is robotics for this group for a large part. And also your future research. And I'm sure this relates to a lot of people who are doing research on technology, mind, and behavior. And so with that, I'll say thank you and have an end.
Okay, I'm clapping.